Hello and welcome to another 3D Experience World presentation. My name is John Lieber, and in this session we will be discussing DraftSight administration. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. If you missed part 1, don't worry about it. SolidWorks and Dassault Systems will be providing recordings of all these sessions through the Proceedings website shortly after the 3D Experience World is completed. Now, this is probably the hardest presentation set I've ever done, just simply because there's so much information that we can share, but I want to go into so many tips and tricks. So in my first presentation, it was kind of short because I just really kind of hit the key points. I'll try to add a little bit more, but hopefully not too much to keep us within time. What we're going to be talking about in this session is working with command line switches after introducing myself again. After we work with the command line switches, we're going to talk a little bit about drawing templates, and then we'll move over to customizing menus or the user interface for DraftSight, and then we'll talk a little bit about sheet sets. Here's where I'm going to go into some tips, but more specifically, how can we use sheet sets to create better organization within our company. And then we'll talk about utilizing macros. I'll give you a couple websites that you can find some free macros from. But more importantly, we're going to talk about some ultimately alternatives to macros. So the scripting capabilities inside of DraftSight. And then we'll go into the 3D experience. And here I really want to kind of discuss some tips that you can give to your users once the DraftSight files are saved into the 3D experience, how we can quickly find those and add them into different areas into the 3D experience. So let's get this started. Excuse me, my name is Jonathan Lieber, and I am a senior specialist with a company called Go Engineer. I can be reached at jlieber@goengineer.com. I can also be reached on the platform itself during the session, as well as after the entire 3D experience world shuts down or finishes up this season. So feel free to reach out to me at any time. If you got a cell phone and you want to snap that QR code, that actually brings you to our website where you can actually schedule some time with me as well. Be more than happy to have a quick discussion with you, see what your questions are, see if I can help you, if we can get you directed into the right location for help or assistance. All right, so command line switches. Many years ago when I started using computers, we didn't have Windows. We had DOS and some other operating systems, and we typed everything. So when we wanted to run a program, we actually had to go to the directory that program was listed at or stored in, and then we typed the name of the program, .exe or whatever the case may be. But what was really cool is we could add what I'll call command line switches. And what that simply means is if I wanted to run DraftSight, I go to the DraftSight directory, I type DraftSight.exe, and then I can add these switches. So I could say like /t, and then specify the name of a drawing template. And instead of just starting in DraftSight and picking the default template, I can specify which template. Now, that was super helpful for me because what I would do is I could actually set up a template for inches and a template for millimeters, for example. And then depending on what kind of drawing I was going to create, I would use a shortcut or a command line switch to specify, hey, I want to start with the millimeter template. Well, now we don't actually work with command line. Nobody types commands anymore into their computer, at least on a Windows-based computer. So how can we take advantage of these command line switches and set our users up for success when they may have different companies that they're going to create drawings for, and we have different setups for those companies. And then we can do that with command line switches, but instead of using command prompt, we're going to use Windows shortcuts. Now, if you have never created a Windows shortcut before, essentially on the desktop, you can just right-click, go down to New, and say, I want to create a new shortcut. It'll ask you where is this file that you want to run, and you go into the default location for DraftSight, for example, and then once you select that, you add the switch. So I'm going to do one here. I'm using this /W. Now keep in mind this is a /, not a backward slash that we use for directories, but it's a /W. And this will actually start us in a specific workspace file. So for me, my duties or responsibilities here at Go Engineer, I do product demonstrations, but I also do product training. And when I do training, I don't want to have any customizations that I've used to increase my productivity, or I don't want to be pointing to my company network drive to where all our files are stored, because we may have a file from a customer or something like that. So I have a workspace file that I work with that basically sets up my user interface, and then I can have a template that specifies which where the directories are, type of thing. So here I'm actually going to use the /w to specify a workspace file. So when I'm doing training, I've created a workspace that is, excuse me, not a workspace. I keep saying workspace, a profile that is going to set up where all the files, such as my templates or sheet sets, anything, I've got that set up as part of this profile. And so I've got that set up in DraftSight. If I switch over here to the DraftSight real quick, click in here and go to the DraftSight menus and go to options. And then down here at profiles, you'll see I have a company A, company B, and then a training 2021 and a training 2022. There's a little bit there's a little bit of differences between the interface between 2021 and 2022. So if I'm doing training for 2021, I want my screen to look like 2021. So in this particular case, my active profile is training 2022, and that's because I've hit activate. And what that just simply means is when I start up DraftSight next time, it's going to start off in that active profile. But I want to create a shortcut that's going to switch to that other profile. So when we create the shortcut, this is the finished piece here. But when you're creating that shortcut, you're just going to right click, say create a new shortcut. It's going to ask you for a directory and what file you want to run. And then after that, it's going to put it into quotes here. And then you're going to put a space and then that / and then P. And here I have company A. I could do training 21, training 2022, whatever the case may be. The really cool thing I like about shortcuts though is you can actually create a shortcut key here. So shortcuts for the shortcut, and you can actually say like Control-Shift-D and then Control-Shift-F or whatever the case may be. And what will happen is when you're on your desktop, you just hit Control-Shift-D and then it will activate DraftSight or start DraftSight with that particular extension or command line switch right here. Super helpful for me particularly because when I'm working, I have different companies and different training scenarios type of thing. But for you as an administrator of DraftSight, you may have different project file sets. You may actually have a directory if you're creating drawings for different customers. You may have a directory for customer A and a directory set for customer B, or customizations that you use inside of DraftSight. So you can actually create these profile or these shortcuts and then distribute those to your users. And then instead of having to tell them what directories they need to place stuff in, they can just simply click on the shortcut and DraftSight will know where the files are supposed to go, where it's supposed to find blocks, title blocks, whatever the case may be. But I did want to throw out there, if you install DraftSight using the default settings, it's going to be installed under the program files directory and then Dassault Systems. Under Dassault Systems, there's going to be a DraftSight directory. And the catch here is the executable is actually in this directory called bin. So you're going to go to DraftSight bin, and then that's where you'll find the DraftSight.exe. And then I just threw out the example here where you have the / P and then company A, whatever the name of the profile is. If you're doing drawing templates, you will have to specify the directories where that drawing template could be found as well. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about here is working with these templates. So there are, of course, the DWG file and the DXF type file types that everyone hopefully is familiar with using at this point. In part one, we go into the options inside of DraftSight, and we talk about these file locations, the system options, and some user preferences that you can set up. But in this particular presentation, I want to talk about the drawing settings. I'd love to be able to go through and tell you, okay, what does behavior mean versus points versus unit system? If you have questions about those, feel free to contact your reseller or shoot me an email, and I'd be more than happy to answer questions for you as well. But ultimately, these are settings that apply to this drawing file. So let's say you have a drawing and you're going to be creating it, but you normally work in inches, but for this one, it's in millimeters. You're going to go into the DraftSight options, and I will show you how you get to the DraftSight options. But you're going to go into the DraftSight options, you'll come here to unit system, and then there's a units setting, and then you can pick what unit of measure you're working in. One thing I like about this points here is when you insert a point or create a point inside the DraftSight, it's going to be a dot. And for me, the dots are really hard to see, so I like using an X or a bigger circle. And you can actually set that up for, say, this drawing is going to be a filled circle or a non-filled circle versus just a dot for working inside a DraftSight. But ultimately, you're going to go through all these different settings here and set up everything that you need. And then the question becomes, how do I actually reuse this? Or how do I use this as a template? So when I say new, how do I get in there? And the simple answer is you're just going to click on the Dassault logo, go to Save As, and then you're going to give it a name and specify the drawing template. Specifying it as a drawing template. So let me show you how to get into the options and also how to actually save as a drawing file. So let's switch over to the DraftSight again real quick. So let's say I need to go into the options. I'm going to hit my DraftSight logo right here. I'm going to go to options. And then here's where like file locations. What I want to point out here is for the drawing support, again, we talked about this in part 1, but I want to say right here. So the default location for your drawing templates is actually stored in this variable or this setting right here. So when I come over here, it's under my name, app data, roaming, DraftSight, and then templates. For an organization, what you'll probably want to do is have maybe like an engineering drive, or you may have SOLIDWORKS PDM, for example, and that's where your templates are going to be stored. So you can actually point this to PDM and say, this is where I want my templates to be stored. This is helpful when you click new, but as you'll see here in just a second, let's say I went in and I customized this drawing and I want to save this as a template. So I'm going to come down here, go to Save As, and you're going to see here, right now, I'm currently in this DraftSight macro projects, draw a circle, but I want to save this as a template, so I can come down here and say this is my inch template, for example, inch drawing. And then right here under Save As Types, I click on that, and of course we have access to all the different versions of DXF and DWG. I actually thought this was pretty cool because I started using DraftSight AutoCAD when they were single-digit numbers. We'll just leave it there. But this will actually allow us to save all the way back to R12 of the DXF and DWG file types. So there's 12 and there's 12 up here. But we're talking about the drawing templates, and that's down here. Did want to point out we do support DWF, DWS for standards files, but here we're going to say drawing template. And as soon as I click on this, you'll see this is automatically changed to the directory where we store templates. Now that's very common in more modern programs, but if you've been using an old CAD system, let's say you are using the old R12 version of a different tool, it may not do that. In DraftSight, we tell it where the files are, and when we say, I want to save this as a drawing template, it's going to automatically switch over there. And then I can click on Save, and then that's going to create that drawing template. So now this is the DWT, and if I close this and come back here to File, to say I'm going to create a new drawing, it automatically brings me my templates, and I can select that inch drawing template that I just created. All right, so for drawing templates, super handy. If you want to get into working with like DWS files or something like that, again, reach out to the person that you purchased DraftSight through. If you purchased it on the web, go into the platform. There's plenty of information on the platform. We're constantly adding information. At the end of this presentation, I'll actually give you a list of resources that are available to you, not just on the platform, but the DraftSight website, a couple different places where you can ask questions, and hopefully actually participate in the forum and answer questions that you may know the answers to. All right, so that's it for working with templates. Next thing I want to talk about is customizing menus. Now, DraftSight, I would consider DraftSight a fully functioning CAD tool. And what I mean by that is there are not really any scenarios where somebody comes up and says, well, is there a command to do X? Yes, there is. And the really cool thing about DraftSight is not only do we have a full-featured program of commands to do different tasks, such as draw a circle versus draw a rectangle, create an API or a macro. We're going to create a macro using the API, whatever the case may be. But you may have certain things that you do on a regular basis, and those can be stored as a script or a Lisp routine. You can actually go into Visual Basic or C# or something like that and write a program But what's really cool about DraftSight is you can actually create your own commands to add to the program. So for example, you go into your customize interface, and I'll show you how to do that here in just a second. But you go in the customize interface, and the first option right here is commands. You can just simply hit the little green plus button, and then you can give it a name. You can give it a command string. So like right here, little these two C's right here, I call it the caret. That's the shift 6. But those are just hitting the escape key. If you've ever used a CAD system before, we kind of sit over that escape key, and when we do something, once we're done, we hit the escape key like 50 times and then go to the next command. You can add those escape presses right here and then run the command. And this command is just that command line. So you could say escape, rectangle, and then make that a command. Now that command already exists inside of DraftSight, but what I did here is I'm going to go quickly over here in the DraftSight, and I'm going to create a drawing file. So I'm going to say, let's use a drawing file. I'm going to use my Go Engineer 2022 template. Doesn't really matter, but I typically like to have a drawing open when I'm making modifications to the interface, because when your users are actually going to be using these templates or these commands, I like to see what they're going to see. So right click anywhere on the screen here except in the graphics area right there, and you come down here to customize the interface. And there's basically 3 main areas that I want to talk about when we're talking about customizing the interface. First one is creating commands. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here, but ultimately, like I said, you're going to hit this add command. That's going to add a command here. And the first thing I do is come up here and type a name. So I can say create 2-inch circle. And just hit the enter key, and there's the command. And then down here on my command string, I can actually say caret C. That's inserting the escape keys just to say back out of any commands that you're currently in. And then we can say, we'll put a little underscore there and say draw a circle by saying circle, and then comma, and then the size. If I remember correctly, that's what I got. I actually have a little cheat sheet over here on my other screen. So let me pull that up here. I actually didn't open it. So let me open up my cheat sheet, desktop, and my cheat sheet. It's a /4 versus a comma. See, don't remember everything, but I'll just wipe this out. I'll put that in there. So when I put it in my cheat sheet, I did a 4. Here I'm going to say 2. And then just hit enter. And what this means is I'm going to have a command in here called create 2-inch circle, and it's just going to draw a circle with a radius or diameter of 2. Now, I want to actually add this to my command line to my ribbon, or I could switch over to toolbars. I want to add that in there. So when I do that, I want an icon. So right here, we have our light icons and our dark icons. Don't get confused by this. This is just letting you know what it is. You can spend all sorts of time in here, and it's like, what am I supposed to type? You're not supposed to type anything in there. What we're going to do here is we're going to click this button, and then this will give us a list of all our icons. If you want to create an icon, you can actually hit browse, and we support things like SVG files, PNG files, bitmaps, JPEGs, whatever you want. Just make sure it's not a poster, but you can create your own as well. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say for my create circle, we have a light interface and a dark interface inside of DraftSight that's relatively new. But I'm going to click on this little circle icon, add that, and when I double click on that, it's going to add it to that command. I'm going to do the same thing down here, double click on that, so it adds it in here. So now that I have that, if I actually hit OK and come back into the customized interface, and let's say it's at 2, but I want it to be 2.5 now, I can actually come in here and say circle, and there's all my circle commands. You see I got a couple here for just drawing circles, 4-inch circles, and there's my 2. But you'll see when I click on that, this is actually telling me where that icon file is located. So that's why I'm saying don't worry about typing stuff. Just click on here, and then you can pick icons. You can actually group it by specific icons, so you can actually use drawing icons. I originally did this, but then people were getting confused. They were like, well, that's the draw circle icon, which is the same thing as this. But I wanted to use something unique. So I actually added this up here to my quick quick toolbar. I can't think of the name of it, but we can click on this right here. So this is drawing a 4-inch circle, and all I have to do is position it by moving my cursor or typing a value, and it just simply places that circle. If I want to do it again, after maybe going in and doing a dimension, so I can say annotate, and I can throw a dimension in here. So hitting the enter key, it's just going to try to create another dimension, but I can actually just click right here, specify where I want it, and there's my next circle. I can click here, put my next circle. You may add it to a ribbon, so you can add it to the insert or the home, or if we switch over to the classic interface, we can actually add those in here. We can also add our own menu. So here's a menu right here, and if I click on that, you see I have a link to DraftSight.com. If I click on that, the way I programmed it or set up the command is it's going to default to DraftSight.com, but I can type something else in. I can type www.solidworks.com or whatever the case may be, but I just simply right click and it's going to go bring up DraftSight.com for me. So I don't have to go to the browser and go there. So you may create some for like an internal web service that has time card information or job logging or something like that. You can actually add that to a item in DraftSight. So instead of having to go to the browser and go to the bookmark, they could just click on it there inside the browser or inside the DraftSight. So again, that's just right clicking, come down here to customize interface. And you create your command, and once you create the command, you can go here to interface, and you can add it to the menus, you can add it to your ribbon, toolbars, whatever the case may be. Now, when we look down here, there's mouse actions. And where I got confused at first is DraftSight, when I was going through the training for myself, they were like, hey, check this out. We put all of the options in a single dialog box, and I'll show you that dialog box again. But then I saw this and I was like, well, there's mouse options in the options and there's mouse options here and there's keyboard options. And does this mean that there's 2 places I can set up aliases, for example, or 2 places to set up the mouse settings? No, what we're talking about here is in our mouse actions, we're saying what happens when you click the physical button of the mouse. Okay, so we're looking at programming essentially the action for when you hit the button. So when I right click, I want it to go to the eSnap menu, and you can click here, you get a list of all the different commands. And what's really cool is my little draw circle command that I created here, I can actually assign that to the right click, or maybe go down here and say, well, if I hold the shift key and hit the right mouse button, I want you to draw a circle for me, which I thought was pretty cool. And then down here under the keyboard, we have these keyboard shortcuts, but what this is actually doing is when I'm using a CAD system in general and I type a command like rectangle, so I type RECT, or I'm doing trim, TR, and then hit the enter key, that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about with the keyboard shortcuts in the customized interface. What we're talking about here is these are the command, like the keys on the keyboard. So like things like Control L, Control F for find type of thing. And where it gets really interesting is this comes down here and there's our shortcut keys, our F or function keys. You can actually assign the function keys a different thing. So like F5 for me in a browser is refresh. Now, DraftSight has a command where you can kind of redraw the screen. So one of the things I like to do is I'll go in and hit this plus sign, hit the F5, and assign that to the redraw or refresh command inside of DraftSight. And then the override keys are just looking at it and saying, well, Shift A versus Control A, that type of thing. When you do these customizations, though, how do you distribute those to all your different employees? So I don't want to have to go in and tell them, hey, you need to go into this and do this, or you need to go to a specific file. But we can create what's called these UI profiles. And these UI profiles are essentially our workspaces. So we can have multiple workspaces, just like I had the workspace set up where I was looking at the idea of different options and system options and word directories. Here is the interface configurations that are tied to the different workspaces. So here I had that classic workspace where I'm using toolbars. I may be working in ribbons. You could have different users with different things. So you can actually create different workspaces, but how do all your users access those? So you can create these UI profiles, And then what I want to share with you here is if we go back into the options, click on options here, we have the profiles here that are the system kind of settings. So the workspaces are how the user interface looks, and these things here, these profiles here, are set up like our system options, our user preferences, drawing settings, right? No, the drawing settings or drawing styles or drafting styles are style settings. That's file type. And then we have our drawing settings. That's that DWT we just talked about. So when I go over here to file locations, I have my drawing support. So this is where I find my drawing templates, sheet sets, that kind of fun stuff. These are my system options. These really don't get stored in a particular file, but what we can do is we can actually create this setting or go and set all this stuff up and then put this on everyone's computer or point everyone's computer to where I got created this setting. And then when they start it up, or this file, they start up their DraftSight and it's going to point over there and say, hey, where's these settings? And then what's really cool is you can actually have an administrative settings file. And what that can do is that can set up some default overrides. Not all the options are available in the administrative profile or file, but there's some good general overrides that you can do. So even if you can make that like read only, and even if somebody goes in and changes it the next time they start up DraftSight, it's going to use your company standards files. But when we look over here at the locations, and I go here to the interface, this is where I set up like the aliases. This is where I was talking about where I have my keyboard shortcuts like rectangle TR. I can actually change TR to be power trim instead of just trim. So we can go through and set that stuff up. But right here, there's this directory for the customization file. So that's going to be stored on a user by user basis, but we can actually point this to a network drive and say all users will use this customization file. That kind of fun stuff. So hopefully you get a good idea there. Not so much about what we can do as far as user interface configuration, but what we might do as administrators of DraftSight as far as the user interface is concerned. All right, let's get back to our PowerPoint here real quick and getting here to sheet sets. Now sheet sets, I don't want to say they're relatively new because they've been around for years, but a lot of people don't understand or recognize what sheet sets are for us. So real quick, I have a scenario where I have a project that contains a whole bunch of different DWG files. And then in those DWG files, I have a whole bunch of different layouts for different printers, setups for PDF versus printing, whatever the case may be. And what we can do is we can create these sheet sets and then use those sheet sets to manage all the different files that are within a project as an example. We can quickly go in and instead of having, like I have my plant project, so that's my sheet set file, and then instead of having to go in and figure out what DWG is the file that represents the full plant, I can just right here, right click, say open. I can rename it, I can print it, but what's really cool here is you can actually globally for this plant say I want to create PDFs of all the DWGs involved with that plant. Okay, so I can print, I can quickly output. So sort of like batch, except you don't have to specify what files because the sheet set knows what files. You can actually even go in here, you can see I've got a hierarchy where I've got the plant, and then I have a sub. In that sub, I've got a couple DWGs. We can work with sheet views or model views. It's really kind of cool. And what I thought was really interesting is you can actually even rename the DWGs here in the sheet set. It will not only update the name of the DWG file, but it will update the references inside the sheet set. So how do I work with these sheet sets? Number one, when I come over here in the DraftSight, I have these panels over here. And if I right click anywhere in the interface, I come down here and go to the sheet set manager. You can actually just type sheet in the screen right here. If I can spell it right, just type sheet and you'll see right here, sheet set and then sheet set hide. So I'm going to click here on sheet set, whichever one is going to bring up this manager right here. You can open up your existing sheet sets. You can actually create new drawing sheet sets. But what I really wanted to show you here is you can actually, you can work with, so you can create a template and then when your users are wanting to create sheet sets, they can use the template that you built, for example. But let's say I'm going to create that template So I can say, I want to use existing drawings. We'll click next. We could give it the name. So this could be plant. We can give it a description. And this is where those sheet set templates are going to be stored. This right here, again, is set up through the options. So you might put this in a network drive. But this is what I thought was really cool, is I have all these different DWGs that represent a plant. And I can actually go in here and set up properties for the sheet set. So why did I create this sheet set? What is the description? What is the default model views? You can actually go in here and select blocks to go in to as part of that project. So label block for views. You can set up stuff for the project, and then all those DWGs can take advantage of saying, here's a single resource to find where my blocks are, or whatever the case may be. All right, so I love sheet sets. I don't think they're used quite enough by companies, but you can create these sheet sets by coming in here and saying new. You can save that sheet set, and then again, in the options, we come down here to the file locations, and then in the drawing support, right down here, where is that template location? Point it to your network drive, and then that way when people need to access the templates or the sheet sets, or if they're creating new sheet sets, we're all working off the same set of information. No pun intended there. All right, so let's go in here, look at our next step. So here's just a quick refresh here. I should have gone here before we started talking about it, but when we're creating sheet sets as a template for our company, you're going to just go in and say, okay, we're going to create some drawing files, put them in a directory, and then we'll go in here, say I'm going to create a new sheet set using those drawing files that we created. And then whenever somebody starts a new project, they can just use an existing template and then fill out the information, and they have not just the one drawing file, but they have a whole set of drawing files already predefined. So you may have front, top, left as views as different DWGs, for example. And they don't have to do that. We can just have it set up for them. All right. So macros. Here I really struggled. I want to spend so much time in macros because I love automation. Now I got a couple things here, and I probably should put languages down here at the bottom, but work with me here. For macros, I put 3 locations here. Now this Graybert website is a company that actually creates plugins for SolidWorks. So it's a macro that's actually been compiled, and they're basically selling you an executable with an installation package. But they got some pretty cool add-ins for DraftSight. And then there's these 2 guys right here, leemac.com and cadcorner.com. They have literally hundreds of macros, Lisp routines, scripts, all sorts of crazy stuff. Even some tutorials and stuff on creating your own. But I do want to point out this. I use these guys all the time. I did run into a problem once where I downloaded a macro, not necessarily from one of these guys, but I downloaded a macro. And here I'm talking about vet all downloaded files. This is where it came back and bit me. I have yet to find a website that's offering CAD macros that are out there trying to destroy your computer. But what was happening is I had a macro that was creating geometry for me. And what I didn't pay attention to is the macro was creating the geometry and putting it on a special layer. Now that layer doesn't conform to my company standards. And what ended up happening is I used that macro to create some geometry. When I submitted the drawing, I got a call back saying, hey, why do we have this layer called Bob, or whatever the case it was? And I'm like, how do we get that in there? And I ultimately figured out that the macro was creating the geometry and putting it on a layer called Bob. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about saying vet your downloaded files, okay? Don't just put it into production, okay? Now, you have the ability inside of DraftSight to create your own macros. Now, understand, macro is more looking at the idea of a full programming. So this could be Lisp, this could be Visual Basic, C++, JavaScript. We support a whole slew of languages, but you can actually go into DraftSight and say, I want to record a macro, hit the mouse around, type your commands, draw something, and then say stop, and then you can go into a programming software program or a programming tool. I don't have the time or the expenses to go through and learn a specific programming tool, so I just use Microsoft Word. I save all my macros as a Visual Basic or Visual Basic for Applications program. And then Word includes an editor for Visual Basic for applications, and I can just use Word to make any modifications and actually run those macros that are going to run into DraftSight. And what was really cool is you're going to meet him a little bit later. There's a guy named Raymond who works for Dassault, and I've worked with him for many years, and he is kind of this Excel guru. If I ever have any Excel questions, he knows the answers to those. And he has created so many what we'll call macro or Excel macro programs where he just ultimately fills out an Excel spreadsheet, hits a button, and bam, inside of DraftSight, I've got my drawing. It can link to an external database, whatever the case may be. And it didn't require an extensive programming knowledge. It's just basically Visual Basic and an Excel spreadsheet. So take a look at that, but those are the macros. But what I want to show you here real quick, because we're running out of time, is scripting. So inside of DraftSight, we have the ability to manually come in here, and I'm going to just type a command. So I can say circle. We'll just kind of continue on this idea of drawing circles. So I typed circle, and then it wants to know the position of the circle. So I'm going to say 5, 5, hit the enter key, and then it wants to know what the radius is. So I'm going to say 1. Okay, so that's how I create a circle. I typed circle, I typed a location, I typed a radius. Now, in my PowerPoint, you'll see it here in just a second when we go back in there. There's a program called Notepad++. It's free. It's Notepad plus some stuff. And one of the cool things is if you're familiar with like writing list routines for whatever CAD system you were using before, Notepad++ not only allows us to type, but it has formatting and some auto completion capabilities. And one of the programming languages it supports is Lisp. So I can actually use this Notepad++. We'll just go in here and say Notepad. Use Notepad++ right here. And I actually had the script already opening here. It's sitting on my desktop as a file called circle.scr. And you'll see right here, this is the script. So circle, 5.5 for location and the size. And what's really cool here, I hate like having to create a whole bunch of script files, but I can hit save, go back in the DraftSight, and then right here, we'll go back to the standard interface, the drafting and annotations. And then right here under manage, there's load applications. Those are the programs you write, but there's the run script. And I can just select that script and hit the OK button, and now I've got a circle on the screen. If I double click out here, there's my big circle. That's a 1-inch circle, 1-inch radius at 5, 5. And then I'll go back in the Notepad and say, let's get one that's 1.5 inches radius. We'll save it, go back in here, say run script, and it's going to ask me, come out of the command, run script, select that again, and now I've got another size. If I want to shift those over, I can just simply go into this text file and change the location and the size and just keep hitting run script, run script, run script, and get all my drawing stuff. At that point, I'd probably look at it and say, you know, maybe I should create a macro for it or make a block and then just be able to put the block and scale it, whatever the case may be. But I really enjoy being able to just script out something and have it do it and then move on. So going back here to the PowerPoint, this is that Notepad++ I was talking about. If you just do a Google search for them, you'll find them there. So we got the resources as far as some websites where you can get DraftSight plugins or add-ins. And then LeeMac and CADcorner.com are some places you can find some tutorial sites, tutorials, scripts, and macros that you can download. Just kind of share the wealth, share the knowledge. And last but not least, I want to talk about the 3D experience. Now, if you've never used the 3D experience, basically it's like a PDM system, but more. And there's actually applications for drawing, that kind of fun stuff. And there is this thing called DraftSight, the 3D experience DraftSight, which I'm not, that I am actually running right now. So you can see it doesn't look anything different. There's just one little thing in there. And what this means is when I create a file inside of DraftSight, so here's my really cool file. I'm going to go in here, I'm going to say save. I'm just going to throw it on my desktop, for example. So we'll just go over here to the desktop and say John's really cool file. John's really cool file. And hit the enter key. It gets saved to my desktop. But how do I actually share that with other people? How do I create a community around this really cool DWG and ask questions like, what do you think I should make changes to? You can actually create focus groups. There's all sorts of things we can do with the 3D experience, but how do I get from my desktop to the 3D experience? And that is, I can just simply come over here to my 3D experience tab, and there's my file, and you'll see right here it says status with the little red exclamation point. That means it's not in the 3D experience, and all I have to do is right click on it and hit save. But what I want to share with you here is, what does this save with options do? So when I click on that, it's going to allow me to save this file to the platform. So there it is, there's my DWG file, and I can say, yep, I want to save this. You can actually batch save to the platform here as well. And once it's into the platform, we can do revision control, we can lock and unlock, we can put it in different collaboration spaces, bookmarks. And I talked a little bit about creating these collaboration spaces, but what I want to do here real quick is, this is my 3D experience platform here. So I have a community called DraftSight, but when I'm actually working in the system, this is where the files go. So this is essentially Enovia. So I've got all the Enovia document control capabilities. For me, way too much, but I don't really use any of that. I just need to put it into the 3D experience, maybe share it with some people, ask the community for help or guidance or something like that. We can actually do 3D play and view the file in a browser. So if I need to send this to a customer and then give them access to it, I can do that. But ultimately, in the community, I see all the documents in my company that I have access to. And sometimes it can be kind of painful. If you've got a lot of different files in here, yeah, I can absolutely do a search. So I could say, John's really cool, and it will find it for me. But what I want to show you here is there's this thing called the bookmarks. Now, what bookmarks allow you to do is create a spot. We'll call it a container. I don't know if that's the right word, but for right now, we'll just call it a container. And you'll see here, I have a container for my DraftSight files, my electrical stuff, I have my project, my SolidWorks models, but here's my container of all my DraftSight files. So they're still sitting in here, but it's just a collection. Here we go. Instead of calling it a container, let's call it a collection of the files that I want to work with. So what I'm going to do here is, when I say save with options, I can actually click here under bookmarks, and then what this will do is this will give me a list of all the bookmarks I've created in the web browser right here. And then I can say I want to bookmark this with DraftSight. So I just double click on that and then say I want to apply that. And when I hit save, it's actually going to put it into my company's Enovia document management tool, but it's also going to create a link to that document in my bookmark. So if I come back in here, refresh, go to another bookmark, and then come back in here, somewhere in here, there's my John's really cool file. And that is literally how long it takes. I'm broadcasting via broadcasting software to you guys right now. I'm recording a video so we can come back later. And that's all it took. DraftSight, save it to my desktop, save with options, and I'm on the platform. I can then shut off DraftSight, share this. We can actually go in and create these communities. So I can add a post, say, hey, what do you think about this? And then link to that file, whatever the case may be. So hopefully this helped you get some good understanding of the capabilities that we can set up to make our users of DraftSight more productive and that kind of fun stuff. Now, before we go, my name's John Lieber. I can be reached at jlieber@goengineer.com. Of course, I'm a resource to you. I'll do my best to help you. But we also have other resources for you. 3D Experience World this year, 3D Experience World 2022, we have over 15. We have 17 DraftSight sessions. We're going to do a quick DraftSight meetup on February 9th. That we call it the Meet the Team Behind DraftSight. I forget exactly what we call it. But this is a meetup where you're going to meet. I'm going to be there. That guy I was talking about, Raymond's going to be there. We're going to have some executives from Dassault Systems that are responsible for DraftSight. You can ask them questions. It should be a really great discussion. And then, of course, there's all the different breakout sessions that we have in the swim community. Now, swim, Right here, I got a link right here. This is essentially our forum in our 3D Experience platform. So it's kind of one of those things, practice what we preach. We use our 3D Experience platform to create communities to communicate with you guys, and you guys can communicate with each other, ask questions, answer questions. So that's the DraftSight community. We have DraftSight.com and 2dcad.com that have tutorials, tips and tricks, help, and then, of course, a way of purchasing DraftSight. But there's a lot of good resources on those two. We have a DraftSight channel on YouTube, so you just go to youtube.com/DraftSight, or just do a search for DraftSight, and you should see us there. And what's really cool is we have the learning journey, which is almost kind of like a self-paced training for DraftSight in there, and then, of course, our help link within DraftSight. All right, so again, my name's John Lieber. Reach out to me on the platform or shoot me an email. I hope you appreciated this DraftSight Administration Part 2. And when you get a chance, reach out and say hi.